This is not your typical victory speech, but let's not have somebody take a victory when she had a very bad night. Who the hell was the imposter that went up on the stage before and, claimed a victory? She did very poorly, actually.
That is Donald Trump celebrating his primary win in New Hampshire last night in a speech attacking Nikki Haley for acting, in his view, like she won. I'm Ellison Barber in for Gadi Schwartz, and this is Stay Tuned Now. Last night, Donald Trump defeated Nikki Haley by 11 percentage points, making him the first non-incumbent Republican to win both the Iowa caucus and the New Hampshire primary. And those results, it seems to make a Trump-Biden rematch even more inevitable. But it is something Nikki Haley says no one really wants to see. She's vowing to stay in the race and is already setting her sights on next month's contest in South Carolina.
New Hampshire is first in the nation. It is not the last in the nation. This race is far from over. There are dozens of states left to go. And the next one is my sweet state of South Carolina.
NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard has been covering this race, and he joins us now. Hey, Vaughn.
Ellison, that's right. And this South Carolina primary is a month away, but Nikki Haley is going to need each of those intervening weeks here because right now polling has suggested that she is down as much as 30 points in her home state of South Carolina, where she served once as governor. For Nikki Haley, she lost by about 11 percentage points in New Hampshire, a smaller margin than the 30 points that she lost by in the state of Iowa. At the same time, New Hampshire allowed independents to vote in their primary on Tuesday night, and they made up almost half of the electorate, and she won independents by more than 20 percentage points. But when you look at registered Republicans, who by and large will make up most of the electorate in other states moving forward, including South Carolina, in New Hampshire, she lost them by a 3-to-1 margin. It was 49 percentage points. So for Nikki Haley, she has to make inroads against Donald Trump among Republicans. Now, she has challenged Donald Trump to a one-on-one debate, and her campaign has already invested a couple $1 million into campaign advertisements in the state of South Carolina here. But for Donald Trump, he wants to wrap this up and focus his attention in the campaign's resources on Joe Biden and the Democrats in the race for the general election in November. And even Joe Biden's campaign saying here in the last 24 hours that this Republican primary is all but over, and they are shifting their attention to Donald Trump as the all but presumptive nominee at this point. For the country, it is only giving way to what would amount to being a 2020 presidential matchup, despite a great share of the country not wanting that when it comes to the actual primaries and the primary electorates. Well, the Republican Party is choosing yet again to go with Donald Trump, and it looks like a likely rematch here at this point, unless Nikki Haley can make those inroads here over the next month ahead of that South Carolina primary. Ellison?
Thanks, Vaughn. Now that the New Hampshire primary is in the rear view, all eyes are on the race in South Carolina, which takes place exactly 1 month from today. South Carolina is presidential candidate Nikki Haley's home state. It's where she grew up, attended college, and served as governor. Tonight, she's holding a rally in the city of Charleston and running a new ad throughout the state where she seems to be trying to generate enough hope to sustain her campaign.
Biden, too old. Trump, too much chaos. A rematch no one wants. There's a better choice for a better America. Her story started right here. America's youngest governor, a conservative Republican. And boy, did she deliver.
It's a great day in South Carolina.
Nikki Haley will cut taxes, close the border, and defeat the Chinese communist threat. America's new chapter, strong and proud.
Joining us now from Haley's rally in Charleston, South Carolina, is NBC News correspondent Ali Vitale. So, Ali, talk to me about the numbers, the reality, the hope, all of this. I went to school in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Nikki Haley did have a lot of name recognition in that state, was very well liked, but when we look at the polling, the idea of a possible home state advantage in South Carolina seems really unlikely for her. What do you make of the numbers?
I think that's the right read, Allison. And look, the state has changed from the time that Haley and apparently you were down here. She is someone who South Carolinians know quite well. In fact, I've heard that from people who have been at this rally and who are excited to see her come back. But at the same time, the numbers tell a story that this is a state that Trump has really been able to mold into an example of a positive Trump coalition, an example of what it is to see the Republican Party look like a party that supports the former president. I will say, I remember being here in South Carolina in 2015 and 2016, and on primary night in 2016, it was expected that this would be a place where Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio could potentially make some inroads. The thinking then was that they were the kind of Republican that South Carolina would respond to. Haley was governor then, and we watched Trump sweep the state and then go on to sweep the rest of the primary. Unclear if that's what we're going to see again this time, but certainly it's a reminder that this is a state that he's done well in before.
So, Allie, in New Hampshire yesterday, the primary there, the majority of likely Haley voters said their vote was more so a vote against Donald Trump than a vote for Nikki Haley. Knowing that the campaign must know this as well, they have their own internal polling, surely they've seen this. Do you have any sense of what the strategy is for her campaign moving forward?
There is a recognition that they need to do better at driving up her margins and her support with actual Republican voters. They were able to put together an interesting coalition in New Hampshire because of independent and undeclared voters, but they know that that's not something that they're going to be able to rely on in a place like South Carolina. They'll do their best to bolster her conservative credentials. Certainly that's something that we've seen her do, even in that ad that you just showed at the beginning of the program. But they're also looking at states further down the calendar, Super Tuesday states, for example, with semi-open or open primaries. That's another place where they can look to expand the tent of Nikki Haley's support and try to build a coalition that looks a little bit more like New Hampshire. And they're hoping that momentum mixed with what they saw in New Hampshire could get them there. But again, it's a really tough path to the nomination.
South Carolina voters, the state itself, it's quite different than, say, Iowa and New Hampshire. A lot of similarities as well, but this sort of is a state that has kind of been a kingmaker in the past, particularly when you look at Joe Biden and the last presidential cycle. What are you hearing from voters in that state right now? Do they fall kind of where you expect, or is it a bit of an eclectic mix?
Look, I think that when you look at what South Carolina did in 2020 for Joe Biden, I'm not sure that there's a parallel character to Congressman Jim Clyburn on the Republican side. But if you're looking at the way that endorsements move votes in this state, Haley has not racked up any of the endorsements statewide electeds, but she has managed to get just one congressional endorsement of Congressman Ralph Norman. He's the only one, though. The rest have gone to Trump. And frankly, even at this Haley event, where you can see this is one of the biggest events that I have seen for her. Hundreds of people welcoming her back into the state with a month to go until the primary. Still, there were some Trump supporters outside, and this is what they said about the fact that she's still staying in the race. Watch.
It doesn't matter whether she stays in or drops out. She's not going to win, and that'll be evident after Nevada. And then when she comes here to South Carolina, it's just going to be over. So we appreciate her running, and she can stay in as long as she likes, but I don't think she'll be in very long.
And look, Ellison, that was one of the nice ways of putting it. Certainly, former President Trump had a stronger sense and a stronger way of saying that he wanted her to drop out just last night in New Hampshire. But still, it's going to be a real bruising battle to the finish here.
NBC's Ali Vitali, we so appreciate your reporting as always. Thank you, my friend. The fallout continues after a panel blew out mid-air on an Alaska Airlines flight earlier this month. At the center of the crisis, Boeing, who manufactures the plane model in question. Today, the company's CEO met with lawmakers on Capitol Hill to address the lingering safety concerns. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles has more.
Ellison, good evening from Capitol Hill. And there is news. The FAA announcing tonight that they are halting the future production expansion of any of these MAX 9 planes. And they've also outlined a very intense inspection and maintenance process that will allow these planes to get back in the air. Meanwhile, Boeing CEO was here on Capitol Hill taking some tough questions from members of the U.S. Senate. Tonight, David Calhoun, Boeing's top executive on Capitol Hill.
Did you ask for these meetings, sir?
Getting a grilling from members of Congress.
Thank you.
Calhoun making a promise to his customers.
Mr. Calhoun, what's your message to passengers concerned about flying on your planes?
We fly safe planes. We don't put airplanes in the air that we don't have 100% confidence in.
Calhoun's comment comes just one day after the CEO of Alaska Airlines told our Tom Costello that he was angry with Boeing and its leadership team. This after a door plug on a Boeing-built airplane operated by Alaska Airlines exploded out of the aircraft in mid-flight. A problem Ben Minicucci, Alaska's CEO, placed directly on Boeing in our exclusive interview.
There's no doubt that Alaska received an airplane off the production line with a faulty door.
Lawmakers are demanding answers. Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan, who represents a state uniquely impacted by the airline grounding 30% of their fleet, said Boeing is taking responsibility for the problem.
He does personally, and assured me that this is the most important issue, which I press him on: safety, safety, safety.
Meanwhile, as Boeing works to solve this problem, senators are warning that they need to catch issues like these well before they happen.
Aviation safety can't be reactive. It needs to be proactive.
The NTSB plans to head back to Boeing's manufacturing plant on Friday. Their goal is to recreate the timeline that led to that door plug explosion. Meanwhile, Boeing CEO David Calhoun is expected back here on Capitol Hill for a public hearing in the near future. Ellison?
Ryan Nobles, thank you. Don't go anywhere. We are just getting started. But speaking of problems on airplanes, an American Airlines flight had to turn around from the runway and head back to the gate because of excessive farting. A passenger apparently passed gas so loud it started to cause a commotion. And then, according to other passengers, he said, and I quote, "You thought that was rude? Well, how about this smell?" And then tooted really loudly. It is not the type of tailwind you think of when you're on a plane. And you know what? It caused a big stink, and the crew had to intervene and remove him from the flight. We all expect a bit of turbulence on a plane, but not flatulence. Still ahead, In-N-Out Burger has never permanently closed a location in its 75-year history until now. But get this, the store is profitable. We will explain what's going on out there. And get ready for some wet weather. Parts of the country are going to get drenched. We have your forecast, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Let's take a quick look around the world. The Pentagon says it struck 3 Iran-linked militia sites in Iraq and 2 Houthi anti-ship missiles in Yemen yesterday. The strikes in Iraq hit headquarters, trading locations, and weapons storage areas for Hezbollah and other groups linked to Iran. That is according to the Pentagon. Defense Secretary Austin says the strikes were in direct response to attacks carried out by the groups against the U.S. An attack on a major airbase in Iraq on Saturday left at least 4 U.S. service members injured, and in the latest in more than 150 strikes against U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria since the Israel-Hamas war started. Turkey's parliament endorsed Sweden's NATO membership bid yesterday after a 20-month delay. Turkey kept delaying the approval, accusing Sweden of being too lenient towards security threats. Sweden has since amended its constitution for tougher anti-terrorism laws. Hungary remains the only NATO country left to endorse Sweden's bid. In Mongolia, at least 6 people, including 3 firefighters, are dead after a truck carrying 60 tons of liquid natural gas exploded. It happened when the truck crashed into a car at an intersection outside of a shopping center. The explosion caused a massive fireball, burning a nearby apartment building and dozens of cars. It took more than 600 firefighters just to get that blaze under control. Thousands in Argentina marched in protest today in Buenos Aires against tough economic reforms put in place by Argentina's President Milei. The 12-hour strike was led by the country's labor unions opposing Milei's spending cuts and privatization plans. Milei has pledged to fix the economy plagued by debt and a 211% inflation. The protest impacted road travel and forced hundreds of flights to be canceled. Russia is accusing Ukraine of shooting down a military transport plane, killing all 74 people on board. It happened near the Belgorod region today. The Kremlin claims 65 of the passengers on board were Ukrainian prisoners of war and that the flight was on its way to a prisoner exchange. NBC News has not independently verified who was on board that plane or what caused the crash. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter has more.
That's right. This is a major accusation from Russia and one with not a lot of evidence at this time. So this video, verified by NBC News, shows a massive fireball geolocated to Russia's western Belgorod region. That is just over the Ukrainian border from the eastern city of Kharkiv. The Russian Defense Ministry says it's a transport plane, an IL-76, usually used to carry troops, transport military equipment, and even weapons, shot down by Ukrainian air defense missiles, killing everyone on board, but providing no evidence that Kyiv was behind it. The Russian Defense Ministry also added it was carrying 65 Ukrainian POWs for a planned prisoner exchange. And that is something both Ukraine and Russia agree on, that there was going to be a prisoner exchange, and that is no longer happening. NBC News has not independently verified the details of the crash, and Kyiv doesn't deny shooting it down. Ukrainian officials say in a statement it's possible it was planned and deliberate by Russia. And speaking late tonight in Ukrainian President Zelensky says we need to establish all of the facts of this incident, especially because it happened inside Russian territory that Ukrainian investigators will not have access to. And Russia says their investigators are on the crash site. It's very different, though, than independent investigators getting access to the scene. Zelensky also says they will insist on an international investigation.
Molly Hunter, thank you. A new video is raising more questions about how the Israeli military treats civilians caught in the crossfires of war. We want to warn you, some of the images you're about to see, they are disturbing. A Palestinian family seems to be walking in Khan Younis with their hands in the air and waving a white flag. Moments later, one of them is shot and killed. It all happened Monday in an area designated as a safe zone by the Israeli military. A Palestinian journalist who witnessed the event tells NBC News that the bullets came from one of several nearby Israeli tanks. NBC News cannot confirm this account right now. And when we reached out to the Israeli military for comment, we were told that the IDF was, quote, not aware of this incident. Meanwhile, thousands of people remain trapped at a hospital, trapped there by heavy fighting in southern Gaza. They are in one of the largest hospitals in the area and one of the few remaining to provide care for people inside of Gaza. A doctor there says they've been under siege for 2 days, also making it hard to get resources in.
We lack for medical supplies. Medical supplies should enter every day to the hospital. And we lack also for food and clean water. Myself, actually, my family, my children, everyone, actually, they are staying here at the hospital. And I don't know how to feed my family anymore.
This all comes as Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said today that Israel will continue fighting in Gaza until there is no longer a threat. NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez has more.
Some of the most intense fighting we've seen in weeks is happening right now in the city of Khan Younis in southern Gaza. The Israeli military says it has encircled the city and it is now fighting street by street. Remember, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian civilians fled their homes in the north. They were seeking shelter in the south, in cities like Khan Younis, and now the fighting has come to them once again. Around 800 people were sheltering inside of a UN compound in Khan Younis when it was hit earlier by what the UN says were Israeli tank shells. They say 9 people were killed, 75 more injured. Our team seeing just horrific scenes inside of this compound. The UN says when its officials were trying to reach the compound to give help, they were unable to do so because of earthworks that the Israeli military had erected. Now, we asked the Israeli military about this. They are denying that it was their fire which damaged this compound, which killed these people. There is also grave international concern for Nasser Hospital. That is the last major hospital still functioning in southern Gaza. There is fighting in the streets all around the hospital right now. People unable to get in or get out. There is a graveyard not far away, but people say it is too dangerous to take the dead there. So they are burying people in mass graves in the hospital grounds. We spoke to the head of the Gaza team for Doctors Without Borders. He says they are desperately short of medical supplies, of basics like food and water, and that at this point, the hospital is barely functioning. The big concern here is whether we see a repeat at Al Nasser Hospital in the south of what we saw at Al Shifa Hospital in the north, where Israeli forces encircled the hospital and eventually went inside. When I was in Gaza last week with Israel's chief military spokesman, I asked him, do you intend to storm that hospital? He wouldn't rule that out. Back to you.
Raf Sanchez in Israel, thank you. The U.S. says it's hitting more Houthi missiles and weapons depot in Yemen that we're preparing to attack more ships in the Red Sea. What's happening in the region could have a ripple effect on the supply chain as well as the global economy. Josh Letterman explains why.
As the Israel-Hamas war rages on, Houthi attacks continue on ships in the Red Sea, even after U.S. airstrikes. And massive oil producer Russia is still battering Ukraine. But the price of a barrel of oil is still lower now than before the October 7th Hamas attack and the February 2022 invasion of Ukraine. So how is that possible? As it turns out, there are other huge economic forces overshadowing the growing geopolitical risk in the Middle East. It starts with the world's second largest economy, China. The country's post-COVID economic recovery is sputtering.
China's been a driver of demand growth, an engine for demand growth in oil for, 2 decades. That growth is no longer necessarily there.
Meanwhile, producers in the U.S. are flooding the market with supply. The U.S. produces more oil than any other nation ever, 13.2 million barrels per day in October. Think about gas prices, so psychologically important for consumers. Nationwide average gas prices hovering around $3 for only the second time since 2021. That comes as demand for gasoline in the U.S. is expected to fall in the next year, with people buying more electric and fuel-efficient vehicles and commuting less because of hybrid work. It's not that investors are ignoring global conflict. Oil prices did spike after Russia's Ukraine invasion and the October 7th attacks on Israel. But markets have also proven surprisingly adaptable.
I think the ultimate thing is, where do you really start to see risks of barrels being taken off the market? That's going to come the closer the war gets to Iran.
And while the Red Sea, now threatened by the Houthis, is a major thoroughfare for oil tankers, the Strait of Hormuz at the mouth of the Persian Gulf sees millions more barrels of oil shipments per day. And that's what really worries experts.
If you close that strait, the oil has nowhere else to go.
But for now, security fears overshadowed by the bigger economic forces in China and the U.S., continuing to push oil prices down and providing some relief at the pump. Josh Letterman, NBC News.
Josh Letterman, thank you. Still to come, a familiar face is hosting The Daily Show. Jon Stewart is back. We will have the details behind his return. Plus, we're tracking some wet weather across the country. Your forecast is coming up right after the break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Here are some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. Earlier today, the Ohio Senate voted to override Governor Mike DeWine's veto of a bill that bans gender-affirming care for minors. The bill, which also bans transgender athletes' participation in women's sports, will now go into effect in 90 days. Earlier this week, we covered the story of Alabama death row inmate Kenneth Smith, who was convicted for murdering a preacher's wife back in 1988. He's set to undergo his second attempt of state execution tomorrow, this time by nitrogen hypoxia. Here's a snippet of that reporting. Smith, who is appealing his execution to the Supreme Court, gave an interview to The Guardian saying that he is, quote, not ready to be put to death and that, quote, they haven't given me a chance to heal. I'm still suffering from the first execution, and now we're doing this again. Well, today the Supreme Court rejected that last-minute appeal, simply saying that Smith's application was denied. Smith has a separate claim pending in court that could call off the execution, but as of now, it is still on. The Department of Homeland Security is demanding that the Texas Attorney General give federal border agents full access to a park in the border town of Eagle Pass. DHS says the state alleges that the park is open to the public, but Border Patrol agents have been restricted in terms of accessing it on their own. They are asking for a response from Texas by Friday. In Arkansas, a manhunt is underway after 2 inmates escaped from a detention center, one of them being a capital murder suspect. The 2 men, ages 22 and 23, are believed to have escaped within 48 hours before anyone noticed they were gone. and it's not clear how they got out in the first place. The sheriff's office says the two inmates, you see them there on your screen, are considered dangerous, and only law enforcement should approach them if they're spotted. And Jon Stewart will return to host The Daily Show on Monday nights, as well as executive produce all of the episodes. Stewart will replace Trevor Noah, who left back in 2022 after hosting for 7 years. You probably remember Noah replaced Stewart back in 2015. Stewart is going to host through the 2024 election and continue on in his executive producer role. There is some dangerous flooding happening across the southern U.S. tonight, with some areas expecting up to 5 more inches of rain after already getting drenched by downpours. NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns has more on the heavy rain stretching from Texas to Tennessee. Good evening, Bill.
Well, good evening to you, Allison. An active weather pattern continues all day long. We've been tracking torrential rain and flash flooding, especially in areas of Louisiana and southern Mississippi. So we have 34 million people that are included in flood watches everywhere in green. So a few spots here in Illinois and also western New York, Rhode Island, and a couple spots here in West Virginia. But the bulk of the problems have been here throughout the South. Earlier today, the heavier rains were in areas of Texas where we had some significant flash flooding. And now in and around the New Orleans area is where all the heavy rain has been, and especially on the opposite side of Lake Pontchartrain, a place called Covington has had significant water issues on the roads up to homes and up to businesses. So that's where the worst of it is now. And we're starting to see some problems even in central portions of Mississippi. Later on tonight, some of this will shift into northern portions of Alabama. And you can just see on the radar here, when you see the yellow and reds, that's heavy rain, typically you associate with thunderstorms. And this main line has slowly made its way now into Alabama, but behind it is still heavy rain. So areas have already picked up 6 inches of rain on the north side of Lake Pontchartrain here where my finger is, and it's still pouring, and there's no end in sight either. So this flooding could get worse throughout the overnight hours. Houston's in a little bit of a break, but you're going to be in and out and around some numerous showers and thunderstorms. I mean, it's just widespread throughout this region. So additional rainfall as we go through Thursday and into Thursday night. That's when this should be ending in the south. But this red is still another 3 inches on top of areas that have already picked up a half a foot of rain. And the heaviest stuff will be in the shift northwards into Tennessee and northern Georgia. And when we get that in the mountains, we could have some significant problems tomorrow during the day. Just lighter amounts of rain to the north of this, but significant problems are developing. So the other story with this rain is the warm temperatures coming with it. So this is what it looked like last week. Arctic air dominating the country. It was frigid the eastern half of the nation. Total switch. Bermuda high, pumping warm tropical air up to the north. That's why we have these heavy rain. And this is why the temperatures are going to soar over the next couple of days. A lot of areas are going to feel more like March and April, 10 to 15 degrees warmer than it should be. Look how warm it's going to be. Charlotte, 68. Norfolk, 69. This is on Friday. Saturday, it gets even warmer. Areas like Washington, D.C. could be in the low 70s. So it's going to be quite a flip of the switch and a little struggle to pick what outfit you should be wearing. This last storm, this is the one that we're going to track this weekend, is going to have a little trick to the end of it. It's going to time up some colder air getting into the northeast. So another soaking rain is possible on Saturday throughout the south. We once again have to deal with more isolated flooding. That rain Saturday night heads up into the mid-Atlantic region. And notice the northern portion of this, some blue shows up. This is a marginal air mass. It's not frigidly cold, but it may be cold enough for a heavy wet snow, especially in mountainous areas of the Poconos, the Catskills, some of the hill towns and areas of Massachusetts and northern portions of Connecticut. We're going to have to wait and see just what happens with this. Our European computer model, very bold, thinking that we could have significant, even heavy snow in possibilities of southern New England, maybe outside of New York City. But our American model says more just a light snow event. So, Allison, we'll track that as we go throughout the next couple days and head towards the weekend.
Bill Cairns, thank you. Flooding, droughts, wildfires. Over the years, we have seen more of these extreme weather patterns that are a result of the Earth's increasing temperatures. It's all part of climate change, right? Which continues to be a hot button issue as voters head to the ballot box. One study shows that climate change was one of the strongest predictors of who Americans chose for president in the last 2 election cycles. That is according to new research from the University of Colorado at Boulder. National climate reporter Kane looks at what this could mean come November.
with the global warming and that, a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax.
The former president has a long history of denying the reality of human-caused climate change.
It'll start getting cooler. You just watch.
And new research from the University of Colorado shows Trump's stance on the issue probably cost him the 2020 election. That's because 2/3 of voters ranked climate change an important issue, and 77% of them voted for President Biden.
Maybe climate change for some voters has become a litmus test issue. The evidence for it is so strong that if they see a candidate denying the issue, then maybe they think, I wonder if I should trust this candidate in general.
Matthew Burgess led the research, crunching numbers from exit poll data and running it through models to calculate roughly 2.4 million voters chose Biden over Trump based on climate change, enough to win the Electoral College.
I don't have a crystal ball, but I would guess that unless there's a different nominee or a significant change in his rhetoric, you would probably see an even stronger effect in 2024 than we saw in 2020.
And that's something younger Republicans have been saying for some time. In 2023, I sat down with Benji Backer, the founder of the American Conservation Coalition.
The Republican Party has no future as a political party if it doesn't continue to embrace environmental solutions, climate solutions. To young people, this issue is not partisan. It's truly about the planet, and we don't care if you're Republican, Democrat. We want actions on climate change. The vast majority of young people feel that way.
And highlighted by a question in the August GOP debate.
How will you calm their fears that the Republican Party doesn't care about climate change?
Prompting most candidates to deny the science, echoing the rhetoric of the former president. This former Republican congressman and founder of Republic EN says that's a dangerous path for 2024.
Climate disputation is hurting the Republican Party generally and specifically hurts Donald Trump because most people have stopped arguing with thermometers, you know.
That's why Inglis remains optimistic, predicting climate action will soon move past polarization into bipartisanship.
And that really Donald Trump is an aberration here. Experience is an effective teacher, often a harsh teacher, but experience is an effective teacher. We're being taught about climate change.
Joining us now is NBC national climate reporter Chase Kane. So, Chase, how dangerous is the rhetoric that we have heard from politicians, particularly the GOP? And are we expecting to hear that same language that we heard the last presidential cycle again this time? And big picture, just to ask you every question possible. Yep. I mean, what should people watching that think and be processing the rhetoric as? I mean, it's not just words, right? It has real impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you have someone denying facts, denying science, that's a dangerous thing. And to be clear, there is broad global scientific consensus on climate change. More than 99% of all peer-reviewed research says this is happening and humans are causing it. So when you have, a former president and a major head of a political party, essentially, like saying that this is a hoax, saying that it's not real, of course that's dangerous. I think all indications are that he's going to continue saying those sort of things until maybe one day he doesn't. But, as we heard in the story, there are Republicans, certainly climate conscious Republicans, who say this is hurting us, not just you as a candidate, but this is hurting us as a party to continue denying science.
I want to ask you about an article that was in the New York Times today, and this has to do with the Biden administration, where they are reportedly pausing plans to approve one of the largest natural gas terminals. Walk us through that. What is that? What does that mean? And from a political standpoint, for those young voters that tend to vote for Democrats and they're maybe seeing that, what will they make of it?
Yeah, so the quick TLDR, if you're not familiar with the backstory, is basically when we take natural gas and liquefy it, super cool it so that we can ship it around the world to Europe, to Asia. There's some preliminary research from Rutgers University which shows that when we're doing that, when you frack it, when you ship it, when you liquefy it, then ship it again, that it actually has a bigger carbon footprint than coal. So that's really raising some eyebrows, and that's why a lot of environmentalists, a lot of climate activists have started protesting and saying, hey, you can't do this. You can't keep expanding all of these things which are hurting the planet in this way. So there were actually protests planned at the Department of Energy in a couple of weeks to try and get the Biden administration's attention. But this New York Times reporting today says that the president is going to hold off on the approval of this major facility along the Gulf Coast in western Louisiana and 16 other similar facilities until later this year, until, I would imagine, after the election when we see how things shake out. But climate activists are saying that at least for now, this is a win.
All right. Chase Kane, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Coming up, one of the most popular burger chains is shutting down a profitable location because of crime. We have those details. But first, you gotta see this. A 12-year-old boy is safe after falling through ice covering a pond in Dundee, Michigan yesterday morning. A pizza delivery driver passed by the pond, heard what he thought was a boy screaming for help. He grabbed his cell, called 911. Within minutes, 2 men and several Dundee firefighters came and helped rescue the boy out of the 20-foot pond. Talk about the right place at the right time. We will be right back. Welcome back. Here are some of the stories happening out west that we're following. A 13-year-old boy has been arrested for his involvement in a burglary at a Compton bakery earlier this month. The teen allegedly rammed a stolen car into the shop's security gate, breaking it and allowing dozens of people to steal from the store. LA County Sheriff's Department says the teen was arrested several days ago, released to his family, but they say later that day he was arrested again, this time in connection with another robbery that was caught on video. He is now in juvenile custody. Also in California, 6 people were found dead on a dirt road in San Bernardino County. Police say they discovered the bodies after responding to a wellness check yesterday. The cause of death has not been disclosed, but police say one of the cars they found near the bodies had signs of bullet holes. And the Los Angeles Times has announced they are laying off 20% of their workforce. The move comes after a union-organized walkout Friday in protest of the planned cuts. The paper's owner says the Times could no longer afford to continue losing tens of millions of dollars each year. The layoffs mark one of the largest reductions in that paper's history. In-N-Out Burger is making history. It will be permanently closing one of its locations for the first time since its inception in 1948. The storefront in Oakland, California, will officially shutter 2 months from today for what the company calls an ongoing issue with crime. In-N-Out COO tells NBC News that, quote, this location remains a busy and profitable one for the company, but our top priority must be the safety and well-being of our customers and associates. We cannot ask them to visit or work in an unsafe environment. Let's bring in NBC News correspondent Dana Griffin from Los Angeles. So, Dana, what kind of safety concerns are they talking about here? Are they actually impacting employees and patrons?
They really are, Ellison, and it's because of that they're now closing this location. So the company cites car break-ins, armed robberies, property damage, and they say it's been repeated. It's happening to their customers. It's happening to their associates. And this location has been in operation for 2 decades. It's the first time in the company's history that they have had to close a location. They've had several that have relocated, but never closing a permanent location, which, as you mentioned, this has nothing to do with sales. You can go to any In-N-Out anywhere. There's always going to be a line wrapped around that building. It's still a very popular chain, but COO Danny Warnick says that the frequency and severity of these crimes leaves them no choice. I actually want to show you some of the stats in Oakland so you can see. This is from 2022 to 2023, the violent crime up 21%, burglaries up 23%, and Ellison, motor vehicle theft up 44%. So it's very concerning.
So, Dana, what is the city saying about this? Are they doing anything to address some of these concerns?
Yeah, so they have ramped up the police presence, including added patrols, surveillance cameras. The police department tells us that it has actually decreased crime by 44%. But listen to one city council member who says there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
It's not a lost cause. We just need to invest and have more dedicated resources to this area. This is the gateway to our city. It's the gateway to the region. And we need Oakland and our regional partners to come together to deploy more of the services and support that are needed in this corridor to sustain our businesses, to support our residents, to support those who are coming in to help revitalize our city in a time of recovery. And so there is more work that we need to do. And where we have invested, we have seen a 40% reduction in crime in this corridor from July to December. And as you're hearing, it's not enough.
Yeah, and Ellison, in August, a group of local Oakland business leaders implored local leaders to do something because they're just so frustrated. And right now, there is an effort to recall Oakland's mayor, and they're trying to get on the November ballot. So that's another story that we're going to be following, again, all tied to this crime spree.
NBC's Dana Griffin in L.A., thank you. Boston is the largest city in America, figuring out how to manage a wave of migrants seeking shelter there. Dozens of migrants were sleeping on the floor at Boston's Logan International Airport today, leaving areas littered with blankets and pillows and at times seeming to turn terminals into playgrounds. Massachusetts estimates it could cost more than $900 million to provide shelter for the unhoused migrants this coming fiscal year. Today, Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey released her state budget for next year, addressing the immigration challenges her state is facing.
This is a problem not of the state's making. It is a problem that we are having to deal with. And so we continue to press for funding from the federal government. We need action by Congress on the supplemental budget filed by President Biden.
Let's bring in NBC's Maura Barrett, who is covering this for us. So, Maura, it seems like finding shelter for these people is a really big problem. What is the city doing right now to try and help alleviate this, at least in the immediate future?
Well, the problem initially is the fact that Massachusetts as a state is already dealing with a huge unhoused population. So a lot of their emergency assistance was already going to that. And now they have 3,500 additional migrant families that have been coming in across the border, adding to this migrant crisis that we've been seeing. And an interesting, unique factor about Boston and Massachusetts is that Massachusetts has 8 sanctuary cities. It's not just Boston that these families are going to. It's a statewide problem. And that's why the governor is speaking out about it. And that's why people are calling for more help. I actually spoke with one of the directors of the coalition that does immigrant assistance, and she was saying that there's just lack of support across the board. I want you to hear some of our conversation.
Do you think that there's enough support in place to help newly arrived families kind of navigate the system as it exists?
There's a shortage in immigration legal services and a shortage in people who are able to help, and more funding is needed.
So on that note of funding, the governor has asked for an additional $700 million to be pulled from their surplus fund. She's asked for an additional $200 million in funding just in general. So she's estimating that this is going to cost the state an extra $1 billion this year to handle. And so the funding is the first step before they can even allocate the other resources. And in the meantime, there's 600 families on this waiting list to even get into the emergency shelters. So that's why you see them staying at the airport, sleeping in local churches, or these overflow temporary housing options they have.
When we look at this issue, it's not a problem that one state alone is dealing with. We've seen it in New York and other states. Actually, 9 different governors wrote a letter, and the Massachusetts governor signed it as well, to the White House and to Congress, saying, hey, we need more help. We need immigration reform, and we need the federal government to step up here. Has there been any reaction to that request from these 9 governors, from the White House or Capitol Hill?
Well, it's a request, but it's also a function of essentially calling out the federal government for not being prepared. They recognize that it's an unprecedented situation, but they basically said that the immigration system as it stands is outdated and that needs to be updated in addition to giving them funding. I'm going to pull up some of the letter that they sent to both Biden and Congress. They basically said the number of migrants arriving in states and cities seeking emergency shelter continues to increase at record pace. States and cities have spent billions of dollars to address inaction by Congress. And so they're really looking to see that step up. They're calling on the Biden administration to help. And we saw Biden step up in the fall to grant some migrants that temporary status to help it make it an easier process for them. But now the Biden administration is basically calling on Mexico to say, hey, help us out to curb these migrants crossing the border at such a record pace, because it's really just been increasing nonstop over the past couple of months. Now, our colleague Julie Inslee has done a lot of reporting on this, but now she says basically they're in this preliminary negotiation on how Mexico can ask us for some help, and so that they can, scratch each other's backs to help each other out with this.
All right. NBC News correspondent Maura Barrett, thank you. Now we want to step back in time for a moment to a period where mental illness and segregation reflected a nation at odds. The year was 1911. Crownsville State Hospital had just opened outside of Annapolis, Maryland. Its purpose to serve as a, quote, hospital for the Negro insane. For decades, it was the only long-term treatment option for Black Marylanders dealing with mental illness. It was notorious for overcrowding and abuse, and it became a symbol of America's racial divide.
If you lived here, this was a place you did not want to go. As a child, you were threatened by your parents or others. If you don't do what I tell you, I will send you to Crownsville.
Is this land sacred to you?
100%. Yes, this is sacred.
Since Crownsville closed its door more than 20 years ago, that land has been mostly abandoned. Now there's a plan to bring it back to life with a new purpose. NBC News correspondent and author Antonia Hilton joins us now. Her new book, titled Madness, Race, and Insanity in a Jim Crow Asylum, is available for purchase now, and it focuses on the history of the Crownsville State Hospital. Okay, so Antonia, let's just start a little big picture here, because this is something you have been working on for about a decade. Why this topic? Why this book? It seems like it was personal for you.
It was a bit personal. I was just 19 years old when I first found out about Crownsville as a college student. And I think I was drawn to this work at the intersection of history and mental health because I actually grew up in a family that refused to talk about mental health. And me and my siblings were trying to have conversations with our parents or our grandparents about family secrets or things we sensed were going on. And we just couldn't get the answers that we were looking for. And so I went searching for it in archives in college. And when I discovered this hospital and I realized that there were living patients and employees with these unbelievable stories and a nearly century-long history here of this institution that so few people talk about in America, even though Crownsville is one of several institutions that were like this around the South. And there were similarly segregated wards around the North. And so I felt like, I think at this time when people want to talk about mental health, this is a history that could really help people.
When we think of the history of mental illness in this country, the way that we have defined it, the way that we have treated it, I mean, really the Western world in general, it's an incredibly long, complicated, and messy past. What surprised you the most when you were researching and writing this book?
Well, I think one of the things that surprised me the most was actually the heroism and the resilience of many of the people who came to work in what you just described as an unbelievably complex system. And the reality is, in some ways, we're still in the dark and in the very early stages of understanding mental illness, which means that, you know, going back to 1911, in terms of therapy and solutions, there really weren't a whole lot of them. Mm-hmm. And so what I love about, especially the heart and the center of this book, are all the stories about nurses and people who showed up and who maybe didn't know exactly how to solve someone's mental health diagnosis, but did all of these small acts of kindness, like making new clothing and shoes for patients, or simply knowing their families and making every effort possible to reconnect them with loved ones and to really surround them with community. And one of the discoveries that you really see in the book is that, you know, there's a lot about mental illness we still don't understand when it comes to biology, but we do know that support, love, forgiveness, and patience with people can do a whole lot to mitigate the deepest pain.
Yeah. I want to read an excerpt from your book, and this, I think, is at the point when you were talking about some of the historic images that we were just showing, but also how the physical structure of this institution came to be. And you write, in part, they are clearing fields, making housewares, and harvesting tobacco as white supervisors or nurses stand over them. The haunting racial lines of the outside world were just as visible in the hospital, with white attendants overseeing black patients who had come or been taken from somewhere in Maryland. These patients had to build the place where they were going to then be treated. When we talk about Crownsville and we look at something like this, I think, okay, that closed, right? It was 90 plus years, but its doors are closed. But the systems that allowed all of this to exist really aren't that different than they were 90 plus years ago. What is the modern Crownsville today? I mean, how do we see this still?
Many Americans live in communities where the primary mental health care facility is your local prison or jail. Mm. And we saw all these institutions close down in the latter half of the 20th century, and politicians at the time promised us that they would build community mental health centers and clinics all over the country. They never came to be. It's contributed to the homelessness crisis in many cities. It's contributed to long wait lists to see doctors and therapists. It's something that people complain about when I go out on trips as an NBC News reporter all the time, just how difficult it is to access mental health care. And so one of the things I look at the back half of the book is the connection between the growing prison system and the end of the mental health care system, and the way in which our country has essentially left us with very little in terms of mental health options, clinics, and support, but a whole lot of places where people can still be locked up. And what does that mean for Americans who maybe don't have fancy insurance or don't have any insurance at all? Well, it often means that they end up interacting with police officers. or the court system before they even see a doctor. And that's kind of the legacy we're stuck with right now, Ellison.
Before we go, I do have to ask you, what is it that you hope when people read this book? If there's one thing that really sticks in their brains, what do you hope they remember and take away from this?
I think I want people to see this history and see that the history can make them feel less alone. And if you're out there and you're struggling with your own mental health right now, when you read the stories of patients, even the tough ones, you actually realize that generations of people before you have struggled with many of the same things, and that there is a better path forward. That if all of us talked a little bit more about what we were going through and we were a little kinder to our neighbor or to our colleague or to our friends, that we could save a lot of lives and build something better in the future.
All right, Antonia Hilton, thank you for being here. Her book, Madness, it is available wherever you shop, buy books. Be sure to check that out. Antonia, thank you. Before we go, it is time for the future of everything. Apple is rolling out a bunch of new features. We will tell you how they can protect your identity and even your money. Stay tuned. Apple has rolled out a new safety feature that can help protect your money and photos if your iPhone is stolen. NBC's Stephanie Gosk shows you how.
A new security setting from Apple tonight, hoping to stop a specific and insidious new iPhone crime. Thieves trick people into exposing their iPhone passcodes, often late at night at bars, then steal their phones. With a passcode, they can change Apple ID passwords and Face IDs, so they can take lots and lots of money.
I have heard from many victims that they said up to $10,000, $30,000.
How many numbers?
6. Wall Street Journal tech reporter Joanna Stern uncovered the crime trend.
We revealed that this was happening in multiple cities across the U.S., happening around the world as well, but definitely an uptick in these crimes happening in the U.S. right now.
And Apple appears to have taken notice. The new stolen device protection setting restricts access with the phone's passcode, instead requiring Face or Touch ID for multiple settings, including Apple ID accounts and the iPhone's iCloud keychain, which many people use to store banking passwords. For some settings, when the phone is not in a usual location like home or work, the user will need Face or Touch ID and then have to wait another hour to use biometrics again before getting access.
It is a bit of a hassle, but is it worth it for more protection? If you had heard from as many victims as I had who have lost everything, then you would enable this security feature.
Stephanie Gosk, thank you. I'm Ellison Barber. We will see you tomorrow, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.